I'm doing a whole adjust to teach right here. I'm going to go on the fly with everything you said because so much of my own journey, I call myself a baby community organizer in comparison to sisters that I've made in the community who've been doing this work for 10, 20, 30. I've had the fortune to meet people who've done it for 50 years. And so I'm constantly learning and I'm constantly reflecting on the wise words you share. And with that, I'm going to start, Kat, by offering my intention right now to everybody for this talk. And that's really to share my vulnerable truth. It's something I've been saying for the last 2 years, and when I say share my vulnerable truth, it's something that's going to make me vulnerable, because I'm going to offer truth as I see it. Sometimes people don't like to hear truth, especially when we're thinking about across sectors, across identity, and across race. My truth may cause harm, and so I want to set that intention. I also want to, because I did it, and I think it's so important, offer a little bit of how I got here and who I am and what puts me in this position to be talking today. So I always say I shouldn't be here. I completed my master's in education at Tufts this past December. I've done that having been born to a single teenage high school dropout mother. I am from England, born and raised, so I identify as an immigrant to this country and multiracial, and I'm Jewish. So, you know, there's a lot coming to the table when I speak. And with all that interracial experience and identity and background, you know, I'm very aware of how difficult sometimes conversations can become when we're speaking about topics of race, identity, hidden histories. And I think that in today's presentation, you'll understand kind of the background I bring and how I step into this conversation. So specifically, my organizing started with Juneteenth. I didn't at the time know Nicole, but I was happy to meet her shortly after I had a successful Juneteenth in Gloucester. And similar to your origin story, I found myself, like many people in our country in 2020, reeling from the public assassination and murder of George Floyd. And some of my youth who I brought in today, Gloucester youth here, had done a great job organizing and bringing awareness to the community. And there were protests, and I would go in solidarity, and there was this energy, and everybody put on their, you know, Black Lives Matter t-shirt or their front lawn stand, and I thought, okay, this is interesting, because I don't know how many of you know Gloucester, but it's a 91.1% white community, and it's a community where if you just go like this, that'll come right back to you, because the community is that tight, right? So it's the first place I've ever lived where people say, what's your name? And if I say Toni, they say, no, what's your name? Because they want my full name so they can place me as belonging or not. And so being this year, having been a resident of Gloucester for 10 years, you know, I feel presumptuous enough to say I live and belong to Gloucester, but that's not what I get back, right? So when I found out in the summer of 2021 that there was going to be a protest for your freedom, as I found the flyer at my community garden said, fight for your rights, but there was no organizer, there was no detailed information, you know, I was a little curious about what they were talking about. What freedom and what rights and who and why. And a closer look of this flyer said, you know, family fun, music and games. I thought, okay, I have a kid. Maybe I want to go. And then a little closer look at this flyer said, June 19th. I said, I don't see anything that's saying this is about Juneteenth, right? And I took that flyer down because that's the kind of person I am. And I said, I'm going to go ahead and send this out to my whole community and find out what is this flyer and what is going on. And not to my surprise, it was clearly an organized event for sectors of the community who were anti-vax, and they had been supported by the local GOP to put on a freedom rally, protest for your rights, your freedom, on Juneteenth. And I said, no, not on my watch, I don't think so. Because I live here now, so whether or not Gloucester allows me to claim it as its home, it is my home. I raised my child there. And I did not want for that to be the only celebration happening on Juneteenth. So I decided I would organize my community, my friends, across allyship, and say, let's do something about this. And what we did was we sought a permit for the one part of the park that wasn't occupied, and I do say occupied, that day, and we asked our farmer friends to donate seedlings and our restaurant friends to donate oysters, and my good friend came from Philadelphia, brought red velvet cake, and we put out all the books I have in my library, we put out all of the games, and we made hand-painted flyers, we blasted the music, and my friend, my good friend, she called me, she said, you know that playlist you made, it's got a lot of curse words on it, there are going to be kids there. I said, yes, I know. I said, I don't know if you've been to a black party, but we don't care. So we had a great time. It was a good party, real good party. And a lot of people showed up, you know, community members, and I was really careful about how I spread the word because, surprise, surprise, I'm not on social media. And that's purposeful, just so you know. And I didn't want the word to get out because I didn't want it to become this opportunity for a photo op and a pushback. This was about celebrating Black freedom and Black joy. That's what it was. I didn't want people to come to the community and see this freedom protest on Juneteenth, you know, and think, what's this city got going on? This is 2021. Weren't we all just talking about, you know, Black Lives Matter? So I was very careful how I shared the word. But people showed up, you know, people in the community, they were piqued. They're like, what's going on? Who? And they showed up and they said, who's in charge here? Who organized this event? And I'm running around, you know, I love to host parties, so I'm just having a good time. And they'd be like, well, didn't so-and-so organize this? Like claiming an organization, or who are you, or what's your credentials? And I started to become aware of this desire to expertify or like academify, like anything that happens to do with DEI or anti-racism. And I thought to myself, no, I don't think so. I did this. I started claiming it. And it was fine, you know, until it wasn't, because shortly thereafter, an organization who works in solidarity as their DEI advocates in the community reached out to me and they said, you know, we had a great time at your event. It was wonderful. I learned so much. Have you considered that next year you should move it to this other location? And you know, it's not too early to apply for a permit. I thought to myself, are you joking? You haven't even asked me how we got here. You don't know the heart space that brought me here, right? The pain that I felt when I first saw that flyer, the rallying of my community to get this moving, the checks I was cutting myself. And I was very offended, deeply offended, but I held it. And I just said, thank you so much for your suggestions. I don't need them, thank you. And I moved on. And then shortly thereafter, they invited me to their meeting, their organized meeting, and I was like, okay, I'll go check it out, and they set their agenda. But you know, I am a professional, believe it or not, and I do read agendas ahead of time. So I read the agenda before the meeting, and there, line item, what does it say? Apply for Juneteenth permit 2022. Oh. And I thought to myself, wow, okay. Now, who do you think is leading this organization? Do you think they look like me? They don't look like me. And I thought, wow, why are you here? Is this performative? Do you want this platform? Did you realize that having a big party is a great way to get a lot of eyes on you? And I showed up to that meeting in my bathing suit, because it was the summer, on Zoom. And I just, you know, hadn't been formally invited. So I just said, look, let me just pop off the beach real quick, hop on the Zoom real fast, and just drop a mic. Because I did. I said, you know, you've caused harm, and you're supposed to be my allies. You're supposed to be people who are doing this work to make a better future for Black and brown people. But you've hurt me more than the front page of the news that wrote a whole article about me and didn't even call me to get my quote. Listen, they're GOP funded. I knew what they're going to do. I don't mind. You know, I know. But it's the people who are closest, who you think are your allies, when that happens, that it causes the most harm. So, I have found myself offering these vulnerable truths to allies a lot. And this is what I'm going to talk about today, because I think that some of the gleanings I've been able to come to through that, I hope can serve those of us who care to do this anti-racism DEI work, who care to build a better future for our children, but maybe aren't thinking about the privilege and the power we sit within, and that we're not shifting the frames. The frames are the same. The dominant white supremacist frames can remain the same, and we can just paint a new picture within it. But it's the actual shifting of the frame that needs to happen. So many of those points were made by Kat and Nicole. But I'm choosing to call that shoaling solidarity. And so I live in Gloucester, and I live there because I love nature. And I love the beach, and I was on the beach walk yesterday with my dog, and I just thought, okay, this is speaking to me. I know this is what my metaphor is. I read an amazing book this past year. I highly encourage if you want a really heavy but excellent read, called Black Shoals, and it's written by Black woman Tiffany Lethabo King. And she uses the methodology and the analytical framework of a shoal to speak about bridging Black studies and Native studies, which have always been spoken in two different spheres. And I thought it really spoke to me because of just my general love of the ocean, but also the definition she offered. And I'm going to give some of that language to you. So she talks about the shoal as a geological and oceanic formation. Shoals force one to pause before proceeding. The shoal's shape, expanse, and density change over time. The shoal is liminal, indeterminate, and hard to map. It is a site where movement as usual cannot proceed. So, if we consider solidarity as shoal, it tells us there's no map. It tells us sometimes we're going to have to stop before we proceed. And one of the things I've noticed a lot in solidarity work, especially in a predominantly white setting, is that there's an urgency, a rush. That frame is white supremacist. Urgency, timeliness. Those frames aren't shifting the narrative, and there's more harm that's often done in rushing through hard conversations without some of the guiding tools offered by Kat and Nicole. And I love that. I kind of giggle because you have your allyship, and I knew we'd all be talking about the same thing. So I was like, this is not to go against what Nicole is saying, just to be clear, okay? But it's an offering of how we move past, because language is always changing. We can't even keep up half of the time. But language morphs and changes so that we can morph and change, and we can encompass more. So it's something that came to me in some of my reading and research is the limitations of allyship. And Nicole, you so beautifully pulled that out of the definition. One cannot name themselves an ally. So I see this happening a lot in our community, and I see a lot of people saying, I am an ally. But then what? And so I've moved into the language of a co-conspirator. It's an active change that requires you to do something, to be an advocate, to not just be empathetic and name yourself, but also to do the work. So I think even in your definition of allyship, you really highlighted that. But I also recognize it allows for the idea of shoaling to come forward. I offer just a vignette, for example. One of my best friends is a white woman, and we both send our children to the same school. And I'm one of maybe 2 families of color who go to the school. And the head of school comes to me during February and says, you know, I'm wondering, do you have any time to look at our library? We're really trying to diversify our library, and maybe you have some recommendations. I said, okay, I'll think about it. And then I walk out, and then I go on the phone with my friend. I said, you know what this teacher just asked me? And she said, oh, I cannot believe she asked you that. I'm going to call her. I'm going to let her know I'm going to do it. You don't need to do it. You're busy. You're in grad school. You have a job. You know, and she listened. And I said, oh my gosh, thank you so much, because I do not want to have to do that. Pause. That's my friend. I was so grateful. She knows me. She knows I have so much going on. She said, let me help you. Let me step in and offer this help, this thing that needs to be done. Let me take it on for you. And it was a relief. Now I want to shift. If someone else, who is also white, had asked me that, okay? Now, imagine, someone else comes up to me and they go, oh, they asked you to do that? No, I'm going to do it. I'm going to take it. I wouldn't respond in the same way. Nothing's changed about that scenario other than the relationship that I hold with the person, right? So the fact that I have a closeness with this friend who knows my life, knows what I need, she's offering help. She's shoaling in that moment. But if the shoal disappears and it's a different kind of landmass and we're out in the water, everyone's swimming, I'm not going to receive it in the same way. And that to me really speaks to how difficult this work is, because people want maps. They want, you know, you do it like this. This is how you become an ally. This is how you do the work. This is how we have this conversation. And there aren't maps for these conversations because I am multiracial, multi-ethnic, an immigrant. I've been raised with my white family. I'm on a journey of finding my black family. I identify as a black woman in this country where I live. If I go to England, that's not what I necessarily call myself. How do you talk when you have so many parts of you coming forward? How do you talk across those parts? So I came up, I love, 4 A's of co-conspirator alliteration. So this is something I've also noticed, and I thought I could offer it as a framework for yourself. Instead of being angry, right, so many well-intentioned white people come up to me. I was just at the Cape Ann Museum the other day. We're doing a wonderful 1.5-year residency with a group of women who are doing a project as artists called Vessels of Slavery Reclamation. And they are artists. And we asked them to come into our archives, read through the archives much like you all did, primary source documents, and find these hidden histories. I have a newsflash. They're not that hidden. They're not that hidden. They're just not. Like, I've been in the archives myself, and every city in the North Shore, just go in, spend one day, you're gonna be like, oh my gosh, I have no clue. You know, it's there. So these women come in and they come to me and they say, Toni, there's been a lot crossed out. Are we gonna step on anyone's toes when we bring this forward? I said, listen, you do what you need to do. We invited you, you're our guest, we know. Then they thought, we can't talk about this, we're not historians, we're artists. I said, okay, well, interpret it how you want. So they come in for their talk at the end of their week residency, and they do a beautiful offering. It's libations, it's calling in the ancestors, it's call and response, it's just, it's embodied. And I think it was lost in a lot of the audience, because here we have our community, predominantly white, looking for the facts. Where are the facts? Did you read footnote? Tell us. And I could feel it because I live in the community and I know the conversation. So I raise my hand at the end and I just say, thank you to you women for coming here and offering this. I've been with them for the whole week. We've been laughing and joking because levity is a tool. It's a tool that we use to survive these horrible, violent histories. And I said, we need to understand these women are artists. They need to come in with their artist voice and offer what they know through their ancestral embodied knowledge. And they looked at me and I could just see them all relax, because someone had said something they didn't feel they had permission to say as guests in the community. When the talk was over, the first person who walked up to me said, thank you so much for sharing how Black people feel this as an embodied response. White people do too. They were a white person. And I just thought, did you listen? Are you hearing me? And they had so much vehemence. They were so angry. I didn't need that anger. I don't need that anger. I need just acknowledgement. I need you to hear what I'm saying. And nobody is responsible in this room for what happened in the past, but we all bear the burden. Some of us different degrees, of course, but we're in it together. But the anger is a blockage. And instead of making assumptions, ask. So that's a lot of the work I find myself doing now, just consulting in different capacities. I have an educator in the room from Gloucester High. I don't know where Alyssa is. There she is. Thank you. Amazing educator at Gloucester High, part of the racial equity team at the high school. They have me coming in, and she does all the work. I'm like, this is excellent. This slideshow you're teaching these teachers. And I just offer a little bit of adjustment. Why? Because there's a recognition that they need the lens that I offer, right? So I come and I say, oh, maybe just that one word, like that one guiding principle where we're asking people to talk. Maybe we need to challenge who we're asking to talk. And, consulting is a way to get people in. So don't assume things for people. Ask. That's a huge way to be a co-conspirator. And lastly, I think I'd like to kind of offer the idea of inclusion. Inclusion is a verb. It connotes like coming into something, being included, bringing people in. I'm really interested in disrupting that center, because that center has typically been a white supremacist center. In all institutions that I belong to, there's the professionalism, the timeliness, the sourcing, the expertise, and when you're trying to build a community of belonging, that center might need to be disrupted. I think another vignette that kind of makes this point for me is in a class I had this past 2 years ago. I had a wonderful colleague, and our professor asked us all, why do you come to this work? We were in a critical education policy class. And they said, because I want a seat at the table. And this was my good friend, he's a black man. And he said, I want a seat at the table for people who look like me. And I love that as an idea. But I said, because I'm provocative like that, well, what if you want to burn the table? But this table really like took on a life in the class. And I started thinking about, I grew up in England, like I said, and I was taught very early how to set a proper table. Okay, the fork's on the left, the knife's on the right, the glass goes over the knife, and I can do all the things. But if I invite my friend from India to this table, they don't need any of that, because I lived in India, we're eating with our hand, right? There are people who eat with their hand, there are people who eat with chopsticks, there are people who eat on the floor. So it's about changing that table. That table scape can't be the one to include everybody if it's set in a dominant way, right? So I really invite us to think about belonging as making sure that everybody who comes to this table has what they need based on their culture, their background, their identity. These are some of the gleanings I've had, and thank you.